Bad whitey, poor brownie, a falsification of history. The overemphasis on colonization and slavery as European phenomena reveals the shockingly poor state of historical knowledge among current Western youngsters. Please fasten your seatbelts. It's high time for a sobering history lesson. The ancient Egyptians colonized the Canaanites, Cushites, and Nubians and regularly enslaved these peoples. The Nubians themselves were also slaveholders. The Sumerians and the Akkadians who succeeded them were also slaveholding ancient societies. Under Assyrian and Babylonian rule, the entire Israelite population of Canaan was transported to the Babylonian city-states in a kind of collective captivity and housed there. The subsequent Persian empires, with the exception of the Achaemenids, would also once again be slave-holding societies. These Persian empires colonized the Middle Eastern peoples and the Turkic-Mongol peoples in Central Asia, as far east as Afghanistan. The original inhabitants of the Peloponnese, the Laconians and Messenians, were brutally subjugated for many centuries as a serving slave caste, the Helots, after the Spartans took control of this peninsula. Slaves were an inherent part of Hellenistic Greek society. The Greeks colonized Sicily and southern Italy, the Anatolian coast, and the Black Sea. The Romans colonized the entire Mediterranean basin and continental Europe, south of the Rhine and Danube rivers. Slaves were also an integral caste in Roman society. The Phoenicians, a Semitic and seafaring people from Lebanon, established colonies in North Africa and Spain and subjected the local populations to their authority. This was a slave-owning, slave-trading, and slave-kidnapping people. The Mesoamericans, primarily the Maya, Toltecs, and Aztecs, fought and dominated each other, enslaving each other, especially war captives, who were then often sacrificed alive to their sun gods. In dynastic China, slaves, eunuchs, and serfs were held from 2000 BC until the 17th century. Informally, slavery as a practical institution persisted in China well into the early 20th century. Slavery existed as a legal institution in Japan until the 17th century, up to the 19th century in Korea. The Great Wall of China was built with forced labor. This cost the lives of 400,000 serfs. A significant portion of these 400,000 corpses were used as fill for that wall. At one point, the Mongols controlled 2/3 of the Eurasian landmass, from Vienna to the East China Sea and from Siberia to India, effectively a colonial empire. Skilled craftsmen from conquered territories were regularly enslaved and transported to remote corners of the empire. The Vikings colonized Scotland, England, Normandy, Iceland, Greenland, and Sicily, and traditionally held slaves. The English colonized Ireland and Scotland. The Thai-Cambodian Khmers colonized the Mekong Delta in South Vietnam. They also had slaves and serfs. The Arab conquerors of North Africa subjugated the original Berber, Bedouin, and Tuareg peoples there, and colonized North Africa and the Middle East. A process of Arabization that continues to this day and still leads to Berber protests, such as those happening today in northern Morocco. In the early Middle Ages, the Berber Arabs of the Maghreb, the Moors, began trading African slaves. Timbuktu, in present-day Mali, became Africa's main slave trading hub. The same Moors conquered Portugal and Spain, making the Iberian Peninsula their proud Islamic vassal state, Al-Andalus. The continental African slave trade originated from the late medieval West African kingdoms of Mali and the Songhai, and was linked to the Berber Arab slave trade in horses, silver, and other goods that they traded in caravans across the Sahara with Europeans, Turks, and other African kingdoms, and later to the transatlantic European slave trade. African villagers enslaved by West African warlords were brought to all corners of the African continent, as well as Moorish Iberia and the Middle East, and later to both Americas. This system originated in West Africa and was expanded through the interaction between these flourishing, historically trade-dependent West African kingdoms and the Arabs and Europeans, respectively. Every black African that was ever sold to a European, an Arab, a Turk, or some other black African nobleman across the continent was sold to this European, Arab, Turk, or African nobleman by a black African. The simple tragedy just happens to be that the Songhai Kingdom experienced colossal internal problems as resources long prized by trans-Saharan caravan trade partners from North Africa started drying up whilst the West African Empire faced rebellions from many of its subjugated vassal peoples. Painfully, the one commodity they still had left in abundance, despite the enormous economic fall and gold price inflations, were those subjugated neighbors. This just happened to coincide right with the moment Portuguese, British, and Dutch trading posts were being set up along the West African coastline. But remember that they were just curious buyers, of more items than slaves, by the way. It were Africans themselves that sought to link up to this newly arrived European trade with their long-existing slave trade, and it is they who did the kidnapping, chaining, and selling of these kidnapped Bantu villagers, to an equally brutal continuation of their transport, either in European or Arab hands. Also remember, the Arabs transported as many, if not more, black slaves than the Europeans did. We just don't see similar Afro-Arab minorities testifying to this history as we do see these Pan-African communities in Brazil, Suriname, the Caribbean, and the United States. Why? Because the Arabs were so gentle as to castrate their male slaves, specifically to prevent the latter demographic situation from arising. In the late Middle Ages, the Ottomans conquered the heart of the Arab world and also the Balkans. They abducted Christian child soldiers in the Balkans, who were technically serfs of the Ottoman government. They also colonized the Armenian highlands, in the wake of which they would commit genocide many centuries later. Due to their differing civil and religious status, Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews in Europe were, for a long time, the only ones who could trade slaves between Christians and Muslims, thus playing a significant role in the South European and Mediterranean slave trade during the Middle Ages and late Middle Ages. The Turkic Khazars were a major supplier of enslaved Slavic Europeans to the Arab and Iranian slave markets. Before Columbus, Native American tribes in the Americas and Canada had the practice of enslaving prisoners after military victories. Ritual torture, sacrifice, and cannibalism were also common practices. The Dalits, or untouchable caste in historical Hindu India, unofficially but surely continuing today, were only allowed to practice the lowest occupations, such as sewage cleaning and animal carcass removal, and had no rights. Under the Tsars, the Baltic states, Finland, Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, and the countries of Central Asia and the Caucasus were de facto colonies of the Russian Empire. Add to this the Czech Republic, the entire Balkans, and Mongolia, and you get the red gulag slavery-dependent mega-empire, which arise out of these Romanov ashes as the Soviet Union. In the 19th century, the indigenous Pashtuns in Afghanistan murdered a significant portion of the Hazara minority and enslaved the survivors. Serfdom, technically a form of slavery, was only abolished in Russia in 1861. This form of serfdom was in effect in many medieval European nations. In the 1930s, Imperial Japan colonized the Chinese province of Manchuria. During World War II, Japan colonized all of East and Southeast Asia. In the early 1950s, China forcibly annexed Tibet as a vassal state. Modern Turkey occupies Kurdistan and northern Cyprus. Spain has colonies on the northern coast of Morocco. Morocco occupies the Western Sahara. Israel is colonizing the West Bank. Denmark occupies Greenland. Indonesia is occupying West Papua. India is occupying Kashmir. Among other places, the United States occupies Puerto Rico, Guam, and Guantanamo Bay, and so on, and so on. Nothing new under the historical sun. As we can see, the majority of the colonizing and enslaving parties mentioned in the historical overview above are ancient Semitic, Turkish, Persian, Berber, Arab, Central Asian, Mongol, Chinese, Japanese, African, and Mesoamerican. As we can also see, a certain portion of the colonized and indentured and enslaved people are European. What highly sensitive snowflakes don't know, or don't want to know, is that the process of colonization and the accompanying imposition of the dominant culture, as well as slavery, are phenomena that have occurred in every era, on every continent, and among almost every ethnicity. That Europeans made it mechanical and global over the past 5 centuries. Everything became mechanical and global in the past 5 centuries. Also trade, also war, also favorable developments, such as the rule of law and technological progress. If history was solely a conspiracy of the white man against the poor, innocent, non-white rest, Why did Europe carelessly send an entire generation of its own young white men to their deaths between 1914 and 1918 in what could be considered a military holocaust? Then why is world history just as much a testament to countless non-European peoples who fought and enslaved each other? Did they beat each other to a pulp? No group of people has been so dominated and driven to death by Europeans as the Europeans themselves. Roughly half of the deadliest wars and cruelest empires took place in East Asia, largely in medieval China. Wars and genocides with tens of millions of deaths that no Westerner has ever heard of. The Netherlands did not become rich from the slave trade or colonial exploitation. The VOC primarily earned its money from older trade routes with the Baltic countries and Scandinavia. The Netherlands suffered losses primarily in Suriname and Indonesia. Shortly after establishing themselves in Java, Sultan Agung tried to enlist the militarily superior Dutch to his cause in order to subdue the rival Javanese kingdoms. The first instinct of a Javanese ruler. The Dutch captured him, defeated him, and enlisted him, along with all the other Javanese players. So much for human nature. If you don't know your history, don't see the cyclical processes that repeat rhythmically throughout the course of history, don't understand the constants of the power field, and view history from today's perspective, a sentimental good guys, bad guys story is quickly created. This story doesn't add up. There are no good guys. There are only bad guys. White, light brown, brown, black, red, and yellow. And sensitive Western juveniles. Emotionally hemophilic snowflakes who are too pussy to accept this natural arena.